How poverty affects students' learning in relation to technology. It is becoming more and more apparent in the world of education that some children have the tools for success while others do not. This is nothing short of a travesty for our nation, and it can largely be chalked up to the infamous concept of economic inequality. In America, economic diversity and socioeconomic status are aspects of our everyday lives that we all have to deal with. Even young children are faced with the economic inequality that exists, persists, and constantly proliferates in this nation. This inequality becomes even more apparent when young children enter school. Some will have their every need and desire met, while others will not even have their basic survival needs met. Sadly, this demonstrates the existence of the privilege gap, or the gap between the haves and the have-nots, which is wider in the United States than in most other industrialized nations. So, some children have the means for success, while others do not, simply due to the socioeconomics of their families. This is wrong, but we live in America, a nation of equal opportunity, not equal circumstance. In regards to the unfortunate have-nots, poverty is becoming an enveloping epidemic that is suffocating our young and preventing them from succeeding in school. Of the 50 million students attending public schools each day, there are about 12 million kids living in poverty in our classrooms. Poverty can no longer be swept under the rug when this many children are fated to endure such conditions. Some children come to school dressed to the nines, while others have holes in their dirty plain white t-shirts. This is not only an example of the privilege gap, but it also brings up the topic of the opportunity gap, or the ways in which race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and other factors contribute to lower educational aspirations. That child who comes to school in the raggedy, dirty white t-shirt is oftentimes immediately looked down upon by educators and students alike. It is assumed that this child will not amount to much, just look at him. By consequence, low expectations are set in place, which subsequently has the ability to generate a self-fulfilling prophecy for low socioeconomic impoverished students. Accordingly, what happens when most of the students within a given school are wearing those shabby white t-shirts? Well, blatantly said, the outlook appears pretty dark. As it turns out, socioeconomic status plays a large role in determining where one lives. Thus, the privilege gap and the opportunity gap have the potential to cluster students of similar economic standings geographically in the same schools, which then creates a learning environment, or the diverse physical locations, contexts, and cultures within which students learn. It is general knowledge that the learning environments of the rich and the poor remain unequal despite government funding and Title I designations. This fact, coupled with the privilege gap and the opportunity gap, all feed the digital divide, or the gap between those who have access to computers, technology, and the internet, and those who do not, which is occurring in American schools today. Merely walk into a well-financed school and see the abundance of technology that exists. By contrast, enter an impoverished school, and one will discover that technology is not so widespread and accessible for students' learning. Many lack electronic classrooms and technology-assisted learning except in the most basic outdated forms. As a result, the technological knowledge gap proliferates, creating a troublesome gap in information and education that builds as students grow up lacking access to technology. This further fuels underachievement on the part of the poor because technology is educationally extremely valuable. For instance, video games and augmented reality represent ways to engage students and teach them important skills and concepts. Young people appreciate their accessibility and their immersibility, and interactive features have been found to facilitate student learning and increase knowledge. Sadly, it is highly likely that poor students do not have access to such educational technology. Thus, their achievement takes a hit when compared to the schools that have such resources. Additionally, technology provides a plethora of positive possibilities for early childhood, elementary, and high school education when it is used educationally and not overdone. Also, in an increasingly technologically advancing society, digital literacy is an essential skill for children to learn in the 21st century. with the appropriate use of technology, teachers have the ability to invite the whole world into the classroom. Technology is unique in that it can give students educational experiences that they would not otherwise be able to experience in everyday life. As a result, we need to integrate assistive technology into our classrooms to help prepare our students for the real world. The U.S. Department of Education states that online learning opportunities and the use of open educational resources and other technologies can increase educational productivity by accelerating the rate of learning. Thus, technology has the ability to endlessly add to children's education. So, when used properly, our kids really do need technology. After graduating high school, students are expected to have the basic computer and knowledge skills to be successful, not only in school, but in everyday life and in the workforce as well. In order to prepare students properly, teachers need to be able to integrate technology into the classroom on an almost daily basis. But when a school is impoverished, this can be so extremely difficult to do because many of such schools lack technological resources. Moreover, game-based methods may benefit the poorest performing students the most. So, technology has the highest potential to help low-performing students more than any other group, and poverty-stricken students are more often than not low-performing. But their impoverished status prevents them from having access to such tools, and therefore their learning is hindered and they do not achieve highly. The lack of access to technology in schools is underlying poverty, and is thus contributing to the hindrance of achievement among poor students, a direct result of poverty. Overall, the inequality that results among students due to socioeconomic status and poverty causes many poverty-stricken students to lack the tools for success. Their basic needs are not being met, their opportunities are minuscule, and they are too frequently lacking the necessary educational technologies for achievement. These underlying factors of poverty are throwing children in the lake and holding them under. As the gaps grow, it is increasingly difficult for impoverished students to learn how to swim and succeed in a technologically advancing world. As educators and Americans, we can no longer allow this terrible epidemic to force our most helpless group of children into failure. All children deserve equal opportunities to learn and equal education in general. This may be an overzealous, overly simplistic thing to ask, but something needs to change. Our educational system needs to promote learning and achievement equally among all types of students from every socioeconomic status and from every walk of life. American education needs to get a set of braces to close the gaps that are existing and proliferating in this nation. Truly, the educational ramifications of poverty and the gap between the haves and the have-nots needs to be explored, especially when it comes to technology and having the tools for success that every single student in this nation deserves.
Welcome. Let's meet our PodNet members. My name's Felicia Reese, and I major in educational English. It's my first semester at the University of Mount Olive, and I'm really enjoying it, but I'm not from this area. I'm originally from Kansas, so it's been a whole new experience, but I'm looking forward to it.
Hi, I am Maria Zimmer, but most people call me Mia. I am majoring in elementary education with a minor in English. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and that is where I learned that I want to become a teacher from experience as a lifeguard and teaching swimming lessons, and I really enjoy it. So I'm excited to be here with everybody.
Hi, I'm Marin Denena. I'm from Hampstead, Maryland, which is right outside of Baltimore, Maryland. I play lacrosse here at UML, and my major is elementary education. And yeah, I'm really excited to do the Zoom call.
Let's meet our subject matter experts. We have with us this evening Dr. Regina Stone Hernandez. She is a professor at the University of Mount Olive under the Department School of Arts and Sciences Education. She has a bachelor's degree in interpersonal communication, a master's degree in teaching and learning, a doctorate in education and instructional technology and distance education, with her doctoral dissertation topic being Evaluating Adult Student Perspectives of Online Instruction at a Rural Baccalaureate College. She taught in Madrid, Spain, Miami-Dade Public Schools, and joined UMO in 2010. She is published in instructional technology research as well. We also have with us tonight our other subject matter expert, Miss Janet Rose. She is a professor at the University of Mount Olive in the Department of Early Childhood Education. She has an associate's degree in science, a bachelor's degree in elementary education, a master's degree in elementary education, and is certified in gifted education. She taught at Wayne County Public Schools for 23 years, teaching the 4th grade in the same classroom, and she taught 1 year of 6th grade. She also works with the Academically Intellectually Gifted Coordinator for 8 years.
Okay, so our topic is how poverty affects students' learning in relation to technology. Every aspect of a poor child's well-being is affected by poverty outside and even inside the schools. So how does this statement make you feel personally? Students who live in poverty are not only more likely to underachieve than their peers from middle and high income households, they are also at risk of not completing school. According to this statement, simply because of the almighty dollar sign or lack thereof, poor children are not achieving in academics. So how does this statement make you feel?
I would say that to begin with, children that are from a low income or poverty situation are lacking the skills to enter public education because many of them have not had the educational opportunities or experiences that other children have had prior to entering school. A lot of the technology programs that some young children are exposed to have not been available for these low-income students. In addition, many of them have not been in a preschool setting where they would be learning the academics that would prepare them for a better start whenever they do enter school. So as a result of all of this, once they do begin their education in the school systems, they seem to be lacking, already behind the others who've had the opportunities they've not had. And so this gives them an unlevel playing field to begin with.
That's absolutely true. And I taught inner city Miami, Florida in the poverty area. I've never taught in rural, but I taught elementary in the poverty area. And I also, before I got into education, I began my entire working career, if you will, outside of Detroit. And everybody knows what's going on in Detroit, up in Flint, Michigan. I worked in the Department of Research of Michigan State University School of Medicine. But children who are malnourished, they do not thrive cognitively. But there are other reasons why that are inexplicable, that children simply don't thrive. And a lot of them are socioeconomic reasons. And I know that Shonkoff and Gardner in 2012, they associated family poverty with a number of adverse conditions. And of those is high mobility and homelessness. You know, when you've got a kid moving around, and you know this as a teacher, Miss Rose, if you've got a kid going from school to school to school, they never put down roots and they never develop socially. And I've never taught early childhood, but I know kids who I inherited in first grade who had been highly mobile. They were not kids who had you know, a lot of Maslow's hierarchy of needs having been met. And also hunger and food insecurity. You go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If a kid doesn't feel like their basic human needs are being met, they're not ready to learn. And parents who are in jail or absent or domestic violence, drug abuse, and other problems, these are known as toxic stressors, because they are severe, because they're sustained, and they're not buffered by supportive relationships. That's exactly out of that study. That, let's go back, they're severe and they're sustained and they're not buffered by supportive relationships. And when children don't have that really calmness, if you will, in their home life, when they don't feel secure that everything's fine, which poverty tends to really undermine, they come to school completely buffeted already. I remember when I taught elementary in Miami-Dade, I always had, you know, snacks in my cabinet, because if the kids were hungry, even though they had gone to, to the free breakfast program in the morning. And you can relate to this, Miss Rose. If they're hungry, they're not going to listen to you. Their stomachs are growling. That's all they care about, stomachs growling. And many kids would come and they hadn't slept all night because they were, mom and dad were involved in an altercation, or, the police were in the community because of drugs, and the kids just didn't sleep all night. And they literally, I would tell them, put your head down on the desk and take a nap. So it's not just that there's no money to buy things with, it's everything that comes along with poverty that affects the kids.
I would like to say on that note that when I was teaching fourth graders, I always had a snack time mid-morning because I felt like so many children came to school lacking a good breakfast. Of course, we had the breakfast program that they could go to in the cafeteria, and some did and some did not. But we had a late lunch schedule, and I knew that these children were going to turn me off because they were hungry, and that affects their attention span. Their cognition is not what you would want it to be, and as a result, if they were not able to get the snack mid-morning to give them the boost that they needed, that could be problematic. As far as coming to school lacking a good night's sleep, I saw that many times over the years with different students, and sometimes they were willing to share what had gone on the night before without my asking, of course, but they would confide in me and tell me different things that were happening in the home that could result in coming to school upset, coming to school tired, coming to school hungry, dirty. Hygiene was not what it would hopefully be. And as you said earlier, whenever you're dealing with students that have a high level of mobility in their lives,
right,
they cannot put down roots, as you said. And so before they can ever become a part socially of the class that they have been placed in, a lot of times they're picked up and they're moving again.
Right.
Another thing that bothers me is the overcrowdedness in a lot of homes where you may have the grandparents, the parents, the children, the cousins, the aunts, uncles, all living under one roof.
Right.
And not only does this interfere with sleep at night, but it also causes the spread of diseases to be more rampant, and that's going to affect their health and their attendance at school, because a lot of times they are absent for or some of these reasons that if they had not been in the situation that they were in, perhaps could have been better.
And children don't have a dedicated place, even within the home. What I found is that they are not a priority in the home. And so more often than not, their bedroom will be taken over by somebody else. And all of a sudden they're sleeping on the floor next to mom. And oftentimes, who knows who mom's sleeping with? I had a lot of kids come to school and say that they had a new uncle. Well, you know what that was. And so they see a revolving door of parental images. And even though they may be in the same place living, the influences in their lives are revolving all the time. And you're absolutely right, overcrowding. What I've noticed in the overcrowding also is that the children's needs are not attended to. If the adults want to watch TV, the TV's blasting. If the adults want to eat at different times, it just seems that the priority is not the children. And I think about that Maasai warrior saying, when the Maasai warriors of Africa greet each other, they say, "How are the children?" And that has always struck me, that in our society, we don't ask how are the children for real. We say it every 4 years to kind of placate to the voters, but in the day in and day out and day in and day out, children really are not, unfortunately, the priority. It's the community poverty and it's the family poverty. And the bottom line is we have a poverty crisis, and poverty begets poverty. And when you have students that are being raised in a home where nobody has been well served by the system, or where they have not really cared to do well by the system. Not everybody's poor because life has treated them unfairly. Some people are poor because they're lazy. But when children see that an example of whatever reason, a legacy of poverty, it's very hard for them, isn't it, Miss Rose, to really believe that they can change something and that it's
Yes,
worth trying.
Yes, it is very hard for them to understand that and have the motivation that they need to be able to try their very best academically or socially or anyway, just to think, what's the use? You know, we're not going to get anywhere anyway. But I think a lot of times some of these situations, as you said, are not necessarily because of poverty as such, as it is a result of poor choices.
Absolutely.
A lot of times the money has perhaps been available, but a lot of times adults get themselves in big trouble by choosing certain kinds of housing or certain cars or certain things that they want. Or if we go even further, into drugs and alcohol and things of this nature that are poor choices.
Right.
And the children, as a result, are the ones who suffer from this.
Exactly.
And when you were saying also that sometimes there's a new person in the home that the child may refer to as an uncle, a lot of times I think when there's a new adult that has come into the household, a lot of times the parent that was there has a tendency to try to please that new adult. And if the new adult is not concerned about the children, that can cause the biological parent, in this case, to not show as much concern for his or her own children.
Exactly. Let me give you an example. When I was married and lived in Florida, I was married to a pediatrician, and we had patients that would come. We had offices all over the county, and we had some that were in poverty areas in an area called Naranja. And it was high hit by Hurricane Andrew. If you remember back in those days when Hurricane Andrew hit, this area got annihilated. But anyway, high amount of low socioeconomic residents and a lot of drugs. And that's where I taught, a lot of drugs. And I remember before I got into full-time teaching that I would be managing that office down there. And honest to God, you guys, we had people that came in with Medicaid, and they had children by various parents, and I'm not making this up, it's an actual reality, but they would sit there and they would have notebooks where everything was organized according to what social worker they had to see and Medicaid cards and such. And I'll never forget that I went grocery shopping, and a patient of ours with all of her children and her Medicaid cards and everything had also gone grocery shopping, and I happened to see her in the aisle next to me. And there I was, working so hard, you know, paying off medical school bills and paying off bills to, you know, to buy the business. And, you know, when you start out in medicine, you're not dripping in money, you're dripping in debt. And I looked over, and she had bought a party platter, a big, huge party platter, and she was laughing and carrying on. She didn't know that I was watching her. And she was saying, this is going to be wonderful for the baby shower, the baby shower. And then she was paying for the alcohol with money. And I'm there thinking, no, this is not what it's about. And you're so right. I mean, that made such an impression on me that a parent who is struggling, I want to be there for them. But it's those examples that are being given. And the word that came to my mind when you were speaking, Mrs. Rose, is the vices and the lack of discipline. And so, yeah. And then we see people like the gentleman who ran for president recently in the last election, Ben Carter. I mean, his mom raised him in inner city with rats running around, but she disciplined her children. So it can be done, because look what came out of that. So absolutely, just throwing our hands up and saying it's society's problem and fault is not a necessarily true blanket statement, but it sure does take so much discipline to fight the trend, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And speaking of Hurricane Andrew and South Florida, I had a student here in fourth grade whose father was at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and they were transferred to the Air Force Base. What is it, Homestead?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so I had this child in fourth grade, and I think it was eighth grade that she was in when Andrew passed through that area and devastated it. So she was in a bedroom in their home, and a huge beam from the house next door just was projected through her window and struck her, and she died. Was killed as a result of that. And, you know, every time I hear the mention of this hurricane in that area, I always think of my student who lost her life, you know, just innocently there waiting out for a storm to be over. And, you know, it was just obviously her time. Her brother was sitting there beside her, and he was not harmed at all. And so
it was horrific, and I don't think that generation ever really got over it, but that was a result of trauma, and you can have trauma effect as well. But I'm thinking about, you know, that a nation at risk that came under President Reagan, a nation at risk, and they did put several factors in there, but it was interesting because they had so many things in that definition that actually, if we go by that definition, every single person of this generation, because they even put children of divorce, you know, it's all encompassing that, you know, that a nation at risk actually it just bleeds over into so much. But I go back to the poverty issue, and, you know, basically Maslow's, the first three: physiological, safety, and belonging. And if our children are being raised with a foundation that is so unstable, then we want to pressure them with school on top of it. We're really not serving them well. And
we will also address Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a few short slides and how that relates to motivation.
I just wanted to add on that I completely agree with you both about the poverty and the snacks in the classroom, because I even remember in 3rd and 4th grade, my teachers would have a little basket on their desk, and if a student looked hungry or they didn't get a packed lunch or something, or not enough money on their account from their parents, my teacher would say, go up and get some crackers or some gummies or whatever they had in the basket at the time, and the student would have the ability to just walk up and get whatever they wanted, which I thought was very important for some of the kids who didn't have the proper food or diet at home.
I was actually what you would call one of those at-risk children growing up. My parents didn't have a lot of money. In fact, my last couple of years of high school, instead of living in a house, I lived at an RV park in an RV, where me and my dad, we lived side by side, slept side by side, ate side by side, everything. And I also, back to what you guys had said earlier about how, you know, being a child and being in poverty, you really don't see a way out. And I didn't see a way out for a long time. And so for me, I just decided that the best way to get myself out of this situation was to join the military. And that's what I did. And even to this day, it's the best decision I ever made for my life ever.
So money isn't everything. Does this apply to education? Personally, I think yes, but I want to hear from both of you. Can this be true in our current age of technological advancement? So
I would like to comment on that, if I may. With technology, I find that a lot of the children that are coming from a poverty situation have not had access to the technological background that others may have had, and especially if they are living in a rural area where internet may not be as available as it is in more urban areas. And I think sometimes, as I have read, you know, we have families that the only type of technology they have would be one phone in the whole family that is shared by them all. And anything that they did as far as email or, you know, looking up research for things had to come off of that one phone. And a lot of times that was not adequate to provide the children that were in school in that family enough time to really do what they needed to as far as homework was concerned. And nowadays, when we are in a situation where textbooks are not being sent home for homework, a lot of the work that students are expected to do at home comes from use of a computer. And when we go back to the phone situation, there are some people that are in a very low poverty situation that may have what we call the Obama phone, where they have the phone that's provided to them with X number of minutes per month, and it's not a big number of minutes that they have. And so this really cuts back on access to technology as well.
Yeah, in Washington, D.C., actually, they found that, Washington, D.C. is one of the lowest performing school districts. And what they've gone is they've realized exactly what you're saying, that these kids might perform well on technology, but their access to technology when they leave the school system is very limited. So they have these buses with Wi-Fi that Microsoft and Apple really get involved in the school systems, helping the kids obtain hardware and all that kind of stuff. But we were lacking that exposure to the internet. And what's being noted is that children in the higher economic schools, they don't have that problem. They can go home and they can continue all these exciting projects. But the kids in these rural or inner city areas that don't, and they need to be able to have Wi-Fi, which they don't have. And also in areas like Africa, Microsoft went in and was giving them their laptops, but they had no way of accessing internet. So then you've got the drones that are going in and offering Wi-Fi. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Not having access to that is very important.
What are some other aspects that may be working in tandem with poverty and the dollar sign that result in hindered student success? That motivation is something that is involved in this. Any personal encounter with poverty has the likelihood to decrease student motivation, which in turn leads to lower scholastic achievement. And this relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow proposed that human beings must fulfill the more basic needs, such as physical and security needs, before being able to fulfill the higher needs of self-actualization and transcendence. So therefore, it must be understood that students may have a difficulty learning and focusing on school if they are cold, thirsty, and lack a proper diet. In addition, some students living in poverty, particularly homeless children, as we've kind of discussed already, are not having their safety needs met. So this can really be a problem for all of these kinds of students.
And I'd like to interject there, and I want to hear from Ms. Rose in this. What I found were poor parenting skills. What do you think about that, Mrs. Rose?
I think that is responsible for so many of the issues that we are dealing with students today. I read an article recently that said the students are not the problem, the parents are the problem, because they have not worked with their children and provided them with their basic needs, social needs or psychological, physical, all of these things, and safety issues are quite a problem with many children who now are experiencing so much violence. And it's not just what we hear on the news with school shootings and things like this. We have a lot of children that come from areas where drive-by shootings, just random gunshots going off all during the night, that has to interrupt their sleep and their well-being. They just don't feel safe. And this goes over into the school day because they come to school, as we said earlier, exhausted and not in the frame of mind to care too much about academics. So their motivation has been somewhat lost because of some of these things that are going on in their environment. But I honestly believe that parents are one of the biggest issues now.
I mean, there are studies that we could throw around that will support money is the problem. And if we gave more money, but we're spending much more money now than we've ever spent on education and getting even worse results than we've ever gotten. So, and I understand, like there's James Coleman, he did a study 40 years ago where he said that the most important thing that affects a student are the characteristics of their fellow students. So if you've got a community that's underperforming, then that's really going to affect that student and they're underperforming. And I get it and all of that. But you and I, Ms. Rose, I think we're talking about, but what's the root of that? And that we see what's happening in the schools and society as being the consequence of something far deeper. Am I right?
Following our brief intermission, Ms. Rose could no longer be with us because she had a prior engagement, but we still have with us Dr. Regina Stone Hernandez.
I think you absolutely are onto something here, because when I was teaching elementary school, I remember in Miami, Florida, that is, and a lot of rain in Miami, Florida, obviously. And so we had a lot of days when the students couldn't go out. And my last assignment there was to teach high-risk students. And they were self-contained, be it because they were put in the self-contained classroom where they couldn't have any contact with other children during the day, because many of them had had behavioral problems, and they would assign teachers to take care of these different students. And I had one of these classes in third grade. Everybody had failed third grade. And so, I mean, they had already gone through 4 teachers by the time I took over the classroom in October. Yes, I said 4 teachers. And when I walked in, they were just going to chew me up and spit me out, these little third graders that thought that they owned the world. And when I got to know them, I realized they had tremendous lack of confidence in the system, tremendous lack in the fact that you were going to stay, because they were so used to revolving doors in their lives. They knew that if they pushed their buttons long enough that you were going to walk out. But I spent like a whole month, yes, teaching them content, but mostly developing a relationship with them of trust. And I remember one particular day when it was raining and they couldn't go out and we couldn't take them to the gym because they would have contact with other kids, that I got a bunch of stuff out and we were playing games and such. And I had a group of girls sitting at my kidney table and we were coloring. And I found that that was a good way to get to talk to them. And they started coloring, paint, with crayons, their homes. And all of a sudden they started getting these gray crayons and dotting all around the house, dotting that. And I said, oh, those are the raindrops. How pretty. And they go, no, those are the bullets. And my heart just sank, because I lived probably 5 miles away, but I lived as the ex-wife of a doctor in a beautiful neighborhood in a wonderful gated community. And I'm not going to lie, I lived very well. And to think that just 5 miles away, on the other side of the highway, other side of US 1, these children were living in an area where this was so constant in their lives. And they would always talk about how their daddies and their uncles had bracelets on their legs. And it was like nothing, like they were talking about, going to the grocery store. And that really made such an impression. And it takes a lot to impress me, because I've been living around the world. But I got a real dose of what the United States is dealing with.
You kind of know where people come from, what side of the tracks they're on, as they say, based on those kinds of things, because my school was like extremely diverse based on socioeconomics. We had people living in tiny, dangerous neighborhoods, and we also had people living in giant, beautiful homes. So we kind of had every part of the spectrum. And I actually know somebody who had witnessed a stabbing in their life, and it used to be surprising as living in the ignorance of childhood, but now it's just a sad reality, I feel like. And having that being tied into education, you can't, like, it's difficult to imagine all the effects that kind of seeing something like that could have on your mental stability. So it could really affect your education and your well-being as a person in general.
Yeah, so if you would have asked me if this was surprising whenever I was, 16 or 17 years old, I would be astonished at the time, because I grew up in a small town, like 2,000 people, everybody knew everybody. And I mean, we weren't diverse at all. And I mean,
Is that in Kansas?
yes, it's called Lewisburg, Kansas, and it's small, and hardly ever anything happens. If somebody's fighting, everybody knows about it. So at that time, I would have been really surprised. But then whenever I joined the military right out of high school, it was kind of like a culture shock to me, because I'm just going to be kind of honest here. Whenever I was in high school, there was like almost only Caucasians with like a couple of other, African Americans, or, there was only Caucasians mostly. So whenever I went into the military, it was completely surprising. And it's like, I didn't even think about those people who lived in a worse place than I did, because all there was to me was little old Lewisburg.
Yeah.
Well, we also have the opportunity gap, the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The privilege gap and the opportunity gap have the potential to cluster students of similar economic standings geographically in the same schools, which then create a learning environment. Is this a good or a bad thing when it comes to achievement?
Well, in 2009, there was a study done by Chapman, Laird, Eiffel, and Kuhl-Ramani. Actually, it spilled over all the way to 2011. And what they found is that poor, the bottom 20% of all family incomes, those people who make the bottom 20%, those poor students, they came from students of poor families, were 5 times more likely, guys, to drop out of high school. These kids that drop out don't disappear. They stay in our community and they become burdens to our community, whether through crime or whether through the lack of skills. Even when you look at the numbers of unemployment, you have to look at the quality of the employment. And the quality of employment in this generational age is not as good as the quality of employment before. People, if you are employed up to 32 hours, you know, you're considered a full-time employment by the government. So be very aware that the numbers that are coming out about poverty versus non-poverty and employed versus non-employed are not really that accurate. And so these people are dropping out at a rate of 5 times higher. They're having to be absorbed by the community.
The digital divide or gap between those who have access to computers, technology, and the internet and those who do not is occurring in American schools today. So how large of an effect do you think this could have on an individual student success?
Personally, I would have to say that the lack of technology has a huge effect because students need to be experiencing life with technology because that is how the 21st century is. And as Dr. Stone was saying, that circle that poverty becomes, lacking the resources and technological advancements when it comes to learning just helps create that circle and keep that circle going around because those students don't have access.
Going off of what Maria said, I mean, it's not only just with the schooling though, but also with the jobs. I mean, after school, they expect you to be able to work with technology. And so if there's a lack of technology, then you're not going to get as good of jobs as you should because you don't have the skills to fulfill what they're looking for.
There is a gender difference. There is an economic difference on how people pursue technology. And like everybody pursues technology for entertainment, but when they use technology for instructional purposes, but if people are not able to be self-taught, if you will, in technology, they're not going to be employable, period. It's what we call the soft skills. For example, knowing how to present yourself, that professionalism, being able to work in groups with other people, actually, and technology is one of them. These have come to the forefront as being more the cause for people to get hired than the degrees that they own. That's something that the administration of this university is looking into quite clearly. Are our students developing those soft skills necessary for them to be employable when they get out? And one of them that we're addressing in Title III is making sure that you guys have proper access to technology. If you don't have those soft skills, you will not be employable. It comes down to this, guys. Can you shake a hand, look somebody in the eye, and speak coherently? And more, that's questionable. What do you guys think?
If you can't hold yourself in an adult or professional conversation, that could impact you in a negative way. So I completely agree.
I agree as well. I think first impressions are so important. We don't realize how important they are, but and it's a natural human instinct to not necessarily judge, but to have a notion of somebody when you first meet them. When you take in all the information that they give you on that first interview, it's really important for you to be able to be professional and to know what you're talking about and sound like you know what you're talking about at least, because that way you create a good first impression, and a good first impression usually sticks.
There's something also that you guys need to consider, and it's called the digital divide, which is used to refer to whether classrooms have computers connected to the internet or not. And you know, the bar has been raised. Technology is here to stay. Technology is the way that we disseminate information. More and more publishers are stopping publishing books. Imagine if you don't have access to the internet, and so you're having to buy book after book after book. My own children, they often say, Mom, I'm going to rent it on an ebook format rather than purchase it, right? And so you can go through your bookstore, you can use your financial aid and such, but you're renting it. And then many times now, university classes, such as mine, we don't even have a textbook. If you guys didn't have access to the internet, how well would you do in my class?
We would not be able to complete any projects.
Nothing. You wouldn't be able to do anything. And so things like having high-speed connections. A lot of times in poverty areas, they don't have high-speed connections. And Wi-Fi dependent devices such as iPads, these are now becoming more dependent, more of the staple of classrooms more and more.
So how big of a problem do you think lack of technology is? Do you think that the constant updates of software and other technology impair schools from using technology?
I think the question should more focus on, are schools so insistent on having the latest and the greatest that they make no decision whatsoever? You know, I've been in schools where if they didn't have the latest smart panel or the latest smart board, they would say, then we're not technology based. In this class, we've used basically mostly free software that's out there.
I found a lot of different types of technologies, like through searching for the apps and creating our Facebook page and using Shutterfly and things like that, that I could definitely see myself using in the classroom, that are next to nothing cost, if anything. Especially the FlipSnack. I just personally enjoyed that. I thought that was a really cool way to present information in a different way that was still requiring skills and understanding of technology for the students.
And I really loved doing the Weebly, doing all that editing and doing all the stuff on there. I really loved creating that. I had a great time doing it.
It's benefiting us because we're more hands-on and we can incorporate everything that we took from this class into our own classroom once we become educators. So I can see this as being a positive thing.
Poverty has always been an issue, but with the advances in society, it has grown. Poverty creates gaps in society, such as the opportunity gap, the privilege gap, and the digital divide. These gaps make it harder for poor children to succeed in school and in life. They are set up for failure just because of the almighty dollar sign. Technology is advancing every day, and some students will not be able to keep up with these advances, not only because they live in poverty, but also because they are not given the same opportunities as those who do not live in poverty. Technology helps students learn. They can be exposed to different cultures around the world, and it will help them be successful in life. The lack of technology in the school systems is appalling and should be an issue that is addressed as soon as possible.
Well, you've brought out a good point that the lack of technology in the school system is appalling and should be an issue to be addressed. But I'll tell you something, as a teacher in the public schools in inner city, most of us were not receiving the training that we needed. Not everybody can afford to go back to graduate school and get a degree in instructional technology the way I did. And in many of the large underprivileged, and even in the smaller, but in underprivileged communities, they don't have the money to put in instructional technologists into every school and every part of the district. And so what you do is you have teachers being told in these workshops that, okay, you need to include more technology and include more technology, but what does that mean? And they don't know it. And hopefully you guys have captured a vision of what it means to use technology as an integral woven part of every single day in the students' lives, in those projects you're having them do, and the way that you're having them process information. I pray to God that you guys stop thinking of schooling as information collectors. You guys are offering them processing experiences through the use of technology. But I think if we don't address the lack of teacher training for them to not only be trained on how to use the technology as far as, you know, the software and the hardware, but teacher training in what it means to incorporate technology in a meaningful way. I hate to be redundant with the means and the meaningful, but they have to learn how to use technology in a way that technology is the vehicle used to process information. And just the way you guys have been doing in your Weeblies and you've been doing in your FlipSnacks, I didn't have you just create a little project on FlipSnack. I had you guys write a newspaper on FlipSnack, didn't I? And so And the whole idea was for there to be a cognitive and constructivist and collaborative learning experience, a project-based learning, problem-based learning, not just write a little diddly and make a little newspaper. No, it's much more than that. And that's what we need to address, training those teachers. Because if you train the teachers well, the students will follow.
So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to educate us about our topic.
My pleasure, guys.
Thank you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Have a good night.
You too.